What is going on, guys? Welcome back. Commentary for you. Jimmy Smith, Ryan Moody, socially distanced as can be, and of course, deemed essential by most people that listen to this show, I would imagine. It's been a little while, but Jimmy, you ever been like, I'm sure you have. This is the analogy that I'll give you. You ever been on like a really long road trip and you say to yourself, like, I don't think I have this in me to drive this other 2 hours. And then all of a sudden you start to see things you recognize. You know, an interstate, an exchange, a gas station, and you say, all right, well, I made it this far. I'm familiar with my surroundings. I know where I am. And then you just push through anyway.
Oh, I've been there many times.
I feel like that's where we are. We are now seeing the light of all the events, right? We're driving and there's the billboard for UFC 249. Dana White is apparently going to rapid fire these events, starting with, I can only imagine what this is going to do to our poor schedule. You know, we're going to have to do a post-fight show and then a pre-fight show almost the same day.
Daily. Yeah.
So get prepared. The 10 days that we had apart will certainly be much more short as far as where we're going to be going with these cards. But right now, UFC 249 scheduled for May 9th, May 13th, May 16th, behind closed doors at the VyStar Veterans Memorial Arena in Jacksonville, Florida. And certainly, there's a lot of mixed emotions. I think you and I have been the king and prince of mixed emotions in the community talking about this. I don't know truly how I feel about it now that it's here. I thought this would happen. You know, and I guess the safety is going to be something we have to deal with secondly, right?
All right. I want to say two things that I think. I want to know if the MMA community agrees on this. If there's any dissent, and I'm going to be looking in the comment section for this. So please. The best thing that could happen is the UFC puts on a string of shows till the end of the year and no one gets sick. Best thing that could happen, right? We have these shows. They're behind closed doors. Everybody's tested. They do as much distancing as humanly possible. They travel safe. They stay isolated in hotels, et cetera, and nobody gets sick. The worst case scenario is they have a show and someone gets sick. Multiple people get sick from a particular show, right? That there's a best case and a worst case. Where we are in the middle of that, we don't know. But I think every fan will agree that the one thing that can't happen, the worst thing that could happen, is people getting ill because of this. The best thing that could happen is we get back to sporting normal and nothing happens. Everybody's okay. Everybody's taken care of. How likely those things are to happen, how far away they are, that's the debate, right? How likely is one of those things to happen? And where you stand on that is how you feel about this fight. The most responsible thing to do is nothing. Not have any shows. You don't expose anyone to any unnecessary risk. That's the most responsible. The next most responsible thing to do is make it as safe as you possibly can and go somewhere that it is sanctioned by a government entity. That's what they're doing in Florida. Now, we can sit here all day and say whether or not Florida is doing the right thing. The mayor of Jacksonville opening things up a bit, or Jacksonville, I don't know exactly how it works. It's the county or whatever it is, opening up the beaches up there. It's not that way down here, by the way. I'm in Delray. Beaches are still closed. Parks are still closed. At least the UFC can say, hey, look, they signed off on it. The athletic commission's there. They bear some of the responsibility for this. What made April 18th go off the rails is they were trying to get around regulation in California by going to tribal land. Disney and ESPN didn't want the heat. Having the Florida government on board diffuses some of that responsibility. They can say, look, it's their job to regulate and make everything safe. We did all the testing they want us to do. We did everything they told us to do to keep everything safe. It's on them too. The UFC isn't putting this all on their shoulders. And I think that's a huge difference, which really allowed this to happen. And one of the reasons I'd love to hear what you think about this. One of the reasons I think they're rapid firing shows, not only do they want to obviously fulfill their obligations, they want to get as many fights out there as they can because they're going to get crazy numbers because it's the only sport on television. If you're going to be first, might as well take advantage of it, right? Another thing that I don't know how many people are thinking about or talking about is the rug might get pulled out from under them at any time. If there's an outbreak in Jacksonville, if there's an outbreak in Florida because they're, kind of loosening things up, if there's an outbreak in Georgia, this might all go south, right? If Jacksonville's numbers go through the roof, they might close this whole thing down immediately. Dana's not stupid. He knows that. He doesn't know how long this party's going to last. Any state that opens up right now is taking a massive risk. There could be big political blowback, and they might suddenly pull the plug. So it makes sense for him as a businessman to get as many fights done as he possibly can before any of that happens, because it would be about, even moving quickly, it'd be about a 2-week delay at least. So, hey, let's get as many as we can done before something like that happens, which may or may not be related to the show. So I want to throw that out there too.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but, there's no other way to look at the numbers, right? There's a 14-day window of infection, and you're running 3 cards in roughly 8 days.
Right.
It has to be driven by let's do as much as we can. I think we've talked about this obviously at length, but there's a lot to this. Logistically, how do you house this many people that far apart? How do you have a camp? How do you have an open workout room? How do you go and get your uniforms? I mean, for those that don't know, a UFC fighter will get to the event a couple days before the fight, immediately go in to get their uniforms, which is a massive room, but houses all the fighter apparel. Yeah, but it houses all the apparel together. So the fighters fight kit, and then obviously the corners get issued their kits. Now, whether or not Reebok is still going to supply them, giving all that, who knows? But essentially, there's one big communal place. They then have to go through kind of a pre-screen health check. Did you get any new tattoos? All that fun stuff. They would sign the posters, which we assume are not going to be at the event. There's no reason unless they're going to keep them for fighter posterity, because the fighters get a copy of the poster. That seems rhetorical at this point. They would then obviously have to go through their camps, share the same rooms in terms of working out. They split their lockers, so half go in one, half go in the other. But having been in those rooms myself,
they ain't big.
And I've never seen. I hate to say it, I've never seen somebody clean one. I've never walked in while somebody's been scrubbing the mats down. So that's a real problem. You run the risk of, God, if one person were to start to spread it, it would be like, a petri dish, wildfire. And, if you have guys going through cuts, you're only making them more susceptible, and you're only making it worse. I mean, I love what it's going to do for the sport from a selfish fan perspective. I love what it's going to do for us. Again, selfish fan perspective. As a human being, everything tells me not to do this.
Yeah, the things that it might be different is they have to clean, sanitize, disinfect everything everybody touches. Number 2, the nature of where we are as a society right now, space isn't going to be an issue. It wouldn't surprise me if they're getting a hotel, an entire hotel, for what a couple rooms cost. And I'm not exaggerating. They could probably get a whole hotel giving away rooms. So usually, if you haven't been in the MMA world for a long time, it's usually one room for the fighter, one for the coaches, maybe. Some pack them all in like one big room. Some it's 2, like, whatever. Guys are sleeping on the floor and stuff. You'll probably get a room for everybody right now. Usually in a big venue like this, there's all these offices and stuff where they're full of people getting ready for tomorrow's basketball game, for whatever. All those are going to be empty. Normally, as you said, everybody kind of be packed in one locker room. There's not going to be anybody in that whole building. Now, that is absurd. That never happens at a functioning auditorium or gym or anything like that. There are always people around. So you can't just take over the whole place. They can take over the whole place. The whole place. So I'm just saying there are more opportunities to keep people separate. Then you would have in a non-pandemic era, you can't take over Barclays and use every single room at Barclays Center to keep people apart. You can't do that. You can now. And so at least those are going to be opportunities they can have. They can, once again, get a whole hotel for the cost of a couple of rooms. So every fight, every cornerman should have their own room, really. And if you're the UFC, you're not cutting corners about this. Because the last thing, once again, as I said at the beginning of this, that is worse. That's D-Day. That is the worst case scenario, is a couple of coaches get sick because of this, and it can be traced back to this event. The UFC just can't afford it. ESPN can't afford it. Disney can't afford it. They'll pull the plug. And so I'm sure Disney is going, look, I don't care if you got to buy the whole block, right? I don't care if you have to buy an apartment building to keep all these people separated so that none of them get sick. You do it. I don't care if you break even on this show because, you know, you are renting out this entire huge space so that people can work out and not touch each other. I don't care. You could buy a 24-hour fitness down the street, right? They're all closed, right? Stuff like that. And I'm not joking. I'm not exaggerating. Your pocketbook just has to open up and you're like, okay, we bought the 24-hour fitness or rented it for the week so that everybody could cut weight without touching each other or being close to one. We bought we rented out the whole chain in Florida because no one's using them right now. Things like that are, you're going to have options and possibilities that just wouldn't exist normally. They would normally be prohibitively expensive and unnecessary. No health club is open. You can send each fighter to a different health club to cut weight and pay the manager to go in there and turn on the power, whatever you have to do, so that they can cut weight individually. That's what you're going to have. I mean, you can do stuff like that when most of the businesses are closed. So, they're going to have to think outside of the box and get stuff like that done to make this work, because the worst case scenario, they can't afford it. And don't think the powers that be at ESPN and Disney aren't looking. They're telling Dana, you better make this safe, dude. We're not going to be first, right out of the gate, and cause an outbreak in the MMA community or in Jacksonville or wherever this is happening. We can't afford that. We don't want it. So it's going to be interesting, the choices that are made to keep people apart.
Yeah, you set every other sport back if you have a problem. I wonder how many commission scales
You'll
then.
set ESPN, you're going to set back basketball coming back? Hello? Yes, UFC, we love you. You're great. You are not effing up the NBA finals. You're not stopping the start of college football that makes us billions with a B. You know what I mean? Like, you are not going to go first, take a risk, go cheap, and have, 3 corners in the same hotel room and they get sick because you didn't sanitize everything. And then they delay the kickoff of the NFL. No, not worth it to anybody.
Dana's just pumping the gas right now as you speak.
It's true.
I wonder.
It's
wonder
true.
though.
Like so much more is at stake because they're going first.
In all sincerity, in the rooms that have to be communal, which would essentially be, the weigh-in, they're not going to do a face-off. I think we all agree that probably the worst thing they could do.
No traditional. So,
yeah. You still no signing posters, no weigh-ins, no face-offs, but you have to weigh in. So traditionally, you have the commission scale, right? There's usually one that's, I'm sure you've seen them where they flat them on the floor. It's an official scale. Yeah, and then they'll, the fighters will go down before. I guess what the average fan may not know is before they actually go on the scale you see with the towel, they've been on an official scale before and they know exactly what their weight is. I know they may ham it up when you're watching them, but, the reality is when they step on those scales, they know what it reads because they've already been on a commission scale before. Some of them even bring their own bathroom scale, but that way they know officially, hey, here's the scale. So they usually have one tucked away, and then they have the one where the commission is where they actually go to weigh in. But I wonder how many actual scales they'll get certified and how many times they could actually say have, let's say, 6 certified commission scales, 6 commissioners, and then now we're going to run, 4 fighters into every single room? For what? It doesn't seem like inherently you can't get. I would not think that you could get 32 different commission scales, for one for each fighter, and then have how many different commissioners there to judge their weight. That seems just insane. Like you could essentially make it as safe as possible, like as sterile as possible, but you're still not removing all the risks. You're never going to make this completely safe. So at some point, why bother going to that point? Why not just have the normal one scale? Everyone uses the same scale, but people are going to look at that and say, well, no wonder they're getting sick. They're standing there, you know, in their underwear, barefoot on a metal scale that somebody maybe hit with Lysol beforehand, but you just can't remove every variable. You know what I mean?
Wouldn't surprise me if they had 4. You know, let's say 4 scales, 4 rooms. That wouldn't surprise me at all. You know, like that's doable. That limits the risk. You know what I mean? Just have so many people. Even the fighters have been tested by this point, and once again, it's vague whether or not they will or will not be. But you know, it wouldn't surprise me we had 4 scales. It wouldn't surprise me we had 5. Do you get what I'm saying? Where they go, okay, look, it's going to cost you X. Okay, here you go. So that the commissioner in full gloves doesn't touch anything. The good news is, for people who haven't been around this sport enough, commissioners and referees and doctors and all these people are supposed to treat every fighter as though they are diseased. Now, that may sound harsh, but they always wear gloves, stuff like that. You're going to have extra face masks. You're supposed to wipe all this shit down. You know what I mean? A lot of times they're supposed to treat everybody as though they're sick. That's their job, right? You don't want one fighter with the flu infecting everybody. So they're going to have to ramp that up. But usually the person, you know, who's checking the scale, who's around the fighters, should be taking precautions. They're just going to be maximized. And so all of these precautions need to be maximized. All the ability to keep people separate, that has to be maximized. Look, we're not going to have a commission scale to pre-check everybody, but we're going to have 5 official scales. These 5 people are assigned to this one scale so that we don't have 20 people in the same room, stuff like that. I mean, and it wouldn't surprise me if the UFC went, hey, look, who cares if we break even on this? We have to spend the money for there not to be a catastrophe.
Yeah, I mean, I could only imagine the money they've lost already. So at this point, I think it's just, you know, you're trying to get water flowing again, right? You already, it's the well's already dry. Let's just try to get something out of it, no matter how much we have to pump this thing, right? I mean, I'm sure they're in a tough spot and they're looking to recover, but I think the underlying conversation we're having here is that reeks of desperation. And you don't make the best decisions when you're desperate.
It's true. You're walking across a minefield first. There's no other way around that. You're walking across. Maybe you don't step on a mine. But if someone's going to, it's going to be you. This is all uncharted territory. Big risk, big reward. The draft. Did you watch the NBA draft? I mean, sorry, the NFL draft yesterday.
I love it. I listen. You're probably going to hate.
The ratings were off the chart. You read about that?
I never want to. Here's the thing. Just to divulge toward the end of this,
please.
There's going to be things that change because of this globally, good and bad. That draft last night, and I think, you know, and this is going to be, you know, non-self-serving to us, but I think one of the things we're going to learn that changes from this is the way things are presented. That draft last night, if anybody didn't watch it, I thought it was the most personal, the most emotional, the most close-knit. You know, traditionally when we look at the draft, it's everybody in a room together, select family members. We hear a little bit of story. We see them walk up on the stage. All that removed, you know, now you get to see people where they're comfortable. They're at home. They have, for the most part, all their friends, all their family members. We hear about a lot more of the personal things that they overcame to get to where they are. And, you know, the fans, to me, when you talk about the draft, I didn't realize how much the fans ruined it. In the draft in the first round, you have a guy that's worked his whole career to get to this point, to be rewarded by this moment. And I didn't realize how often that moment is screwed up by the drunk guy screaming that they didn't draft the wide receiver he wanted, and booing the heck out of this kid walking out on stage. So to me, I really thought last night was so much better. And what we may learn this weekend is, although I didn't think from before we thought it was better this way, maybe without all the media there to drum up, drama and to make things, small altercations that happen bigger than they are. Maybe if you don't have all that media there to give those cameras something to show, if you don't have all those people there asking those questions to create that problem and create that storyline and make that narrative, hey, maybe we get a more pure fight. Maybe we get something without all the pre-fight sound bites, but maybe we get a better competition at the end of it. That's kind of the only thing I'm hoping for at this point.
It could be. I mean, we don't know. But my point in bringing up the draft is there were people who never watched that damn thing, who were just like, sports is on, oh my God, and like wetting themselves. It was the most watched draft ever by a lot. And it wouldn't surprise me if these first three UFCs get crazy numbers. Crazy numbers. Because there's nothing else on. Big risk, big reward. So they will do everything they can to not step on that landmine because there's so much money to be made if they can keep this going for a couple of months before any other sports get out there. But holy God, and I really want to hear from the fans, if there's a worst case scenario to you, then they pull off UFC 249 and 3 fighters on the card get sick and a bunch of people in the camps get sick. And it can be traced back. It's the worst thing. It derails everything. So, that's the risk versus reward the UFC is going through. So they have to spare no expense to make this disease free.
Let me ask you, because, we've used that word, trace it. Well, I guess we've used that term, trace it back.
Yeah.
And I think it will come down also, in the comment section, I think it will come down to personal opinion. So where do you feel like traceability begins? Because I'll be the first one to say, you and I both know the way media works. If anyone were to get sick, the first response is going to be, well, you can't prove it happened here. You can't prove it happened during this actual fight, this actual event, that contact actually initiated itself at this moment. That could have happened on their trip over. That could have happened on their trip back. That could have happened on their contact afterwards. So, what do you really need? Does it have to be the fighter, somebody in the camp, more than one person that we know together? How much would it take for you to say, yes, there was an absolute connection there between that corner, that fighter, that person, the personnel, and an illness, or just writing it off as, well, they could have got it while they traveled? Because I think, for the most part, I am going to, and this is going to sound terrible, I'm going to err on the side of not blaming the UFC, because I know of all the uncontrolled events that can happen during their travel, as we've talked about for the last 20 minutes. I have a pretty firm feeling that the most controlled environment they'll be in is what the UFC is hosting. So I'm giving the benefit of the doubt that any illness or spread would happen before or after the event. I can't blame the event for that if it happens.
2 things I will say to that. Number one is, if there are, I would say, more than 2 cases from people who don't geographically live in the same area, it'll be traced back to that. Meaning, if 3 fighters who don't live anywhere near one another happen to get sick after going to that event will get blamed. If 3 fighters in the same camp get that, well, they could have gotten it in camp for a while. They could have had it before. They could have done all these kinds of things. But if 3 fighters who have no other way of connecting with one another except being at this event, that's a pretty good indicator. The second thing I will say is, does it matter? If anybody gets sick from this event, they will come down on this thing with both feet. Even if they got it somewhere else. Do you expect the publicity to be good? No. And that's what Disney and ESPN want to avoid. So it doesn't really matter. If Henry Cejudo and Dominic Cruz both come down with COVID, no matter what happens, even if they're asymptomatic, and bad press. Horrible press. That is the worst. So your idea they could have got it somewhere else, sure, they could have. That's not what the narrative's going to be. That's not how the PR is going to shake out. And that's what you're really trying to avoid with this, right? That's what you're really trying to avoid is bad PR if you're the UFC, because Disney pulled the plug last time over PR. I was talking to people who were involved in Bellator when they pulled the plug in at Mohegan Sun. And I said, you know, they had already weighed in. They had already been around all the commissioners. They'd already been. Why did they pull the plug when they had already been basically exposed to everybody they were going to be exposed to anyway, right? There wasn't any more risk holding the fight the next day. And they didn't know. The people I talked to, they didn't know why, because it was above them. But they said what they heard was the optics. Viacom didn't like the idea that all sports had been pulled and we're holding this event. It looks bad. It's bad press for us. We don't like the way this is perceived. Perception in fighting oftentimes is reality. So your idea that, you know, you can't prove it happened to the UFC, do you think that's what the articles are going to say? No. No, they're going to say this was a horrible idea. See what happened? See? That's what's going to happen. Even if, you know, it isn't necessarily like, you can't prove it happened here, but that's not going to matter. When you want to avoid the perception of making a mistake in a time of a pandemic, you can't afford that to happen.
I think you have the people waiting in the wings to say, I told you so no matter what. I just have to.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
I just have to know what my tolerance is. Your tolerance is 2 people. I think I'm probably right there with you. I do want to leave you with this.
And they would have to be in different camps. I want to make that clear. If 2 guys from American Top Team get sick, okay, they could have gotten sick training in American Top Team or whatever. And I'm not calling it any particular team. I'm saying if 2 people are from the same city, okay, if they're both from, let's stay with, you know, American Top Team. Let's say they're both from Miami. They could have gotten it in Miami in the same pool. If one guy's from Albuquerque and the other one's from Miami and they both get symptoms at the same time, the only time they came together was for this thing. And that's when you start getting, it becomes mathematically improbable that they both happen to get symptomatic at the same time when they happen to be together 3 days before. Statistically, it's hard to get around that.
We don't know who the refs are going to be for this thing, but have you seen Mike Beltran turn his handlebar mustache into a mask?
Yes, I did. Yeah. I love Mike.
Do we need that? I feel like, you know, there's a gimmick there, and I'm sure he will still have to wear something underneath of it, but I do think we need that in our lives for this event to take place.
I think we might, yes. If Mike's doing it, Mike, use the mustache as a mask. Do it. Just for all of us, just for the fans.
I don't think Frag Trig is going to do it based on the comments I saw.
Probably not.
All right. With that said, we appreciate you guys checking this out, and you know we will be back very shortly with a lot, like every other day when I say that very shortly, more
You'll
commentary.
get sick of us.